This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Gary, looks like am I looking at a Chargers t-shirt?
You are. Clinched their playoff spot today, so it only seemed appropriate.
Wow. And what's your prediction?
I am not optimistic that they will go far, but I am pleased that in the first season with our new head coach that we've made it to the postseason. I'm choosing to view that alone as a win. Anything else is a bonus.
Wow. You remind me of the Chicago Cubs fans of yesteryear. It's kind of...
We haven't endured quite as much suffering, but I just, I have to let history inform my expectations. And, I'm choosing to revel in the fact that our first year with a new coach, we made it to the postseason. I'm calling that a win. And if we go in and shock somebody playing an away game in the playoffs and get a win under our belt, then that'll be a cherry on top.
I love it. Okay. As we're recording this, it's our last weekend of 2024. Gary is unaware of what I'm about to do because I'm going to test his acumen. We're going to, between the two of us, name our in reverse order. You're unaware of what I'm about to do, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. In reverse order, top 10 legal stories of 2024. And we'll go back and forth, and you've had no time to prepare for this whatsoever. Now, if we alternate, you're going to start at number 10. What is number? And then you're going to have to go from 10.
Okay, so this is mercifully not 10, it's 5.
Yeah. And when you look at it that way, very good with your math skills, very appropriate in this past week as Vivek and Elon are fighting with the MAGA faithful over math and engineering in America, that you went right there to divide 10 into 2.
Okay. Wow, this is pretty tough to do on the fly. Let's see here.
But it's pretty good that you instantly reduced it to 5. So your mind, I think, instantly...
I'm trying to make myself more comfortable with this because 10 was daunting. I thought you wanted to do 10 each, and I was a little, overwhelmed. So 5 is making it a little bit easier. Let's see here. Number 10, I'm going to put at the replacement of the judge in the Young Thug trial after the judge pulled shenanigans and was discovered by Young Thug's defense lawyer and called out and attempted to throw his attorney into jail for contempt, only for the higher courts to step in and not only say, no, you're not doing that, but then to abruptly remove him from the case and replace him.
And that was Brian Steele. And that's an excellent choice because, boy, did that, we talked about it this past year. One of the great things about the Young Thug case was seeing in the courtroom the lawyering, the judging, if you will, having the transparency. I've often said one of my big regrets on Peterson 20 years ago was that there wasn't a camera in the courtroom, because boy, when you see that and you see what happens and you see that judge and Brian Steele really kind of standing tall and saying, I'm not going there, Judge. Sorry, I'm pointing you, I'm holding you accountable. I'm the one, I'm here. I'm defending my client. You're not going to tell me to snitch out whoever gave me the information as to the shenanigans you were doing in chambers. Kudos to him. I might even have given him a higher ranking than that. But when you look at it as half of 10, that's a good one. It's a really good one.
Thank you.
Number 9 this is a tough one. I'm going to put the disqualification. We're still down in Georgia. Maybe that's what's informing my decision. Disqualification of Fonnie Willis by the appellate court is going to be number 9. And that was just recently. That case, I think, speaks volumes to this past year. The revelations about her and Nathan Wade, the appointment of Nathan Wade, the judge who everybody was giving good marks to, so kind of a counterbalance down there. Same county as the judge who was disqualified in Young Thug, but this judge, I believe his name was McAfee, did a kind of a Solomonic decision, at least at the trial court level, where he ruled that that one of them had to go. Basically, Nathan Wade resigned. The lawyer, who, by the way, there's a crossover there, and I really wish I could remember her name right now, but she was the one who represented Brian Steele in the Young Thug case, and she also represented the one of the defendants in the before Judge McAfee ended up getting or forcing discovering through the divorce proceeding of Nathan Wade the shenanigans there, and then the Court of Appeals stepped in and said no, the deputy, namely Wade, derived his authority through Fonnie Willis. Therefore, if you're saying that there was a conflict, you can't purge that conflict, so to speak, by getting rid of Wade. You had to get rid of Fonnie as well. I think the next motion will be that it was void ab initio, the Latin for from the beginning. If she was conflicted from the beginning and she had to be thrown out, then the entire proceeding should have been voided. And I think that's where we're headed. Throwing it to you for number 8.
I probably should have put this one closer to 10, but I don't think that we can get out of this top 10 without mentioning this story from the very beginning of the year. And the reason that I'm going to include it, it's not necessarily a top 10 legal story, but there was a recent update that you and I discussed covering 2 weeks ago, and we never really got to it. So what I'm going to put at number 8, and I agree that maybe it should have been closer to 10, but jumping at judges in Nevada, the gentleman who the clip we played, who launched over the bench at a judge who was giving a ruling that he did not like. And the recent update in that case is that that person went back before that judge and was sentenced to 27 years in prison for that act. And I believe that the initial jump was over something much more moderate, like a year or maybe 18 months. It was something small where the judge was basically smacking him larger than larger than someone might normally be sentenced for the crime in question. But he had been before her multiple times, and she decided to say, I do not want to keep seeing you in front of me, so I'm going to set an example and give you a bit of a harsher sentence. He jumped over the bench at her because he was frustrated and angry at that decision. And now here we are, 10 or 11 months later, and he's been sentenced to 27 years just for the jump itself. So that's certainly a notable legal story, at least in the reasonable doubt world.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to, in full disclosure, I'm going to name stories that I have an affiliation with. And that's number 8. Number 7, I don't think you can get away from the fact that the Hunter Biden two cases, one in Delaware where he went to trial, was convicted, then the case that I actually was his lead trial counsel on, but on the day of trial, he entered a plea and then subsequently was pardoned recently by the president. I think that probably fits in right about there as a legal story. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next less than a month, 3 weeks, because subsequent to Hunter's, there were roughly 1,400 and change other pardons, and then 37 of 40 death penalty commutations. And so that's still unfolding. But right now, that where does that put us? As number 7?
Yeah, you put that as 6, I believe. Wait, no, I did 10. And then I did 8. Okay, so that was 7 that you just did. So I have to come in at 6. And I think at 6, we just sort of have to put the blanket dismissals and evaporations of all of Trump's various cases. I think that could go higher, but I think that we've got some specific cases that we still have to mention, a couple that you're affiliated with that I certainly have on my remaining list if you don't snake them from me. But just the general Trump win, I think, and all associated legal machinations and evaporations, I guess, is probably the better adjective, because that's sort of what happened. He kind of won the presidency, and one by one, there's still, Bragg's still hanging on in New York, but largely everything that was being held over his head has sort of evaporated or been dismissed and moved on from. So I think that that's kind of a larger, several legal stories rolled into one, but I think that one fits nicely there around the 6 mark.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I would probably, as you mentioned it, you parsed it, I think, real well. The Jack Smith prosecutions, the classified documents, which was dismissed by the judge, which we modeled the motion in Hunter's case, saying, if the special counsel was void in the Trump case, then why shouldn't it have been void in the Hunter Biden cases? And so the Jack Smith cases, I think, clearly are a good entry there at number 6. I would probably put number 5 separate and apart from those two. I'm gonna follow up with yours. The Alvin Bragg 34. People always say makes him a convicted felon. I'm still taking the argument that since he's never been sentenced in those cases, that he's not a convicted felon. Now, that is clearly the law federally and in the state of California. And I've seen some of the comments and some of the interpretations in New York that go both ways. But I think that to call him a convicted felon, Trump a convicted felon, I would still maintain that until he's sentenced or the rulings on the presidential immunity come to play, that he is not. But I think that clearly should be number 5 or one of the top 5 legal stories of 2024, separate and apart from Jack Smith. Interestingly, I saw an interview just before we were taping this where President Biden says one of his regrets, besides dropping out, is in the interview, he says, was appointing Merrick Garland, which is interesting because even somebody like me who has had, my share of run-ins, so to speak, with the DOJ, the Merrick Garland DOJ era, which is coming to a close in the next 3 weeks, has not been marked by distinction, in my humble opinion.
So what does that leave me with number 4?
It sure does, Gary. Pressure's on.
So I've got 4 and 2 left.
Yes.
I'm gonna bank on the fact that you'll do one of the 2 that are associated with you that are sticking out that need to be addressed. So I will do the number 4 legal story. I would say would be President Biden dropping out of the presidential race and the anointment quite quickly of Kamala Harris and her subsequent 100-day campaign and Veep stakes and everything that went along with that. To say that is not one of the top 10 legal stories of the year, I think is just in error. I mean, it might be the biggest legal story of the decade because it was, from whichever side you looked at it and whichever lens of history you look at it, it was certainly viewed one way by one side in the moment and then another way by another side. And now that we have the benefit of 2020 hindsight, there are all kinds of diverging opinions from both sides of the aisle, I would say.
So number 3, I think that's a great choice. Number 3, I'm torn, but I'm going to do post-conviction proceedings because I'm hoping that you pick number 2 because I've got in my mind what number 1 is. So I'm trying to do this machination.
Well, number 1's a family affair.
Wow, look at you go. Number 3, I think, has got to be, I mean, this is tough. 3 to 2. It's got to be Diddy, I think.
Okay. It was going at 2 if it wasn't at 3, so that's fine.
Yeah. I think that clearly that's number 3. I think that it'll probably be number 1 or number 2 in 2025 because that's when the trial is. But it's an interesting, fascinating situation as to the fact that he's sitting in custody, somebody I've known for 15 years, represented for probably more than 15 years when I think about it, and what a trial that's going to be, and that's where I'll put his number 3. This is really a tough one for you, number 2.
it's going to be controversial because I'm going to pick one a little bit with the lens of the reasonable doubt world as well as the larger legal world. But to me, I think that to not have Daniel Penny make this list would be in error. We can argue about whether or not it was 2 or 3. Mark put Diddy at 3, so that's the nature of us trading off. But I think that the Daniel Penny trial in New York and the fact that the political aspirations behind that led to a citizen who, by all accounts, was doing a public service, ended up having to go to trial for his life on murder, and was subsequent, and the shenanigans that the DA's office went through after the jury came back and said we can't all agree, and just attempting to say JK on one of the charges, and then subsequently having the jury just get frustrated and say no, he's not guilty then. And was able to move on with his life. And I don't know if you saw, but then he joined the president and vice president elect in their box at the Army Navy game just a few days or maybe a week later. So while not maybe the biggest legal story nationally, I think that it was certainly of note and of high interest for anyone who follows, legal stories like we do here on Reasonable Doubt. And we devoted well over a year to it. So to not have it fall somewhere on the list, I'm sure I'll get plenty of tweets about it being number 2, but this is the way it goes when Mark legitimately does not prepare me for these things, and we end up trading back and forth. I'll pull back the curtain and say I've spoken to Mark several times in the past 24 hours, and this absolutely never came up. And quite the opposite, actually. Mark told me he was going to send me things that we'd be talking about, and he just quite frankly did not. So yell at me if you want about it being number 2 versus number 3 or 4, but that's what I'm picking. That one needs to be on the list.
So there's a lot of contenders for number 1, and obviously it's a subjective list. I mean, I can think of, the Scott Peterson retesting of the DNA, obviously close to my heart. I can think of the Jussie Smollett reversal of his conviction, which I think virtually no one saw coming except, by the way, over here. I think you could take a look or the Andrew and Tristan Tate, kind of the past year for me. I think you could also make a case for a number of other legal stories, like Matt Gaetz being both appointed as AG and then the release withdrawing and then release of the House ethics. You could do all of those. You can talk about Trump's $15 million settlement with ABC. I mean, you could a lot of recent ones, but I think
the $15 million settlement with ABC is more of a media story, but I get your point. There's a legal aspect to it as well, and that could be up there. But I think that for the purposes of this show, I think it's pretty obvious what it's got to be.
Should I say it first or let you guess?
No, you can go ahead and say it first.
No, I want you to guess. Guess. What would you say?
Well, let's just say I attended one of the largest press conferences I've ever seen in person, and it was on this subject. So if I'm wrong, you can go ahead and set me up. But
any way you cut it, the irony that 35 years later, that the Menendez brothers, who were, in my opinion, the subject of DA politics in Los Angeles County, once again are revisited by DA politics in LA County. And why do I say that? The DA who was in his electoral fight and lost, George Gascon, initiated resentencing. The newly elected DA who claimed that he was going to read it and give everybody a fair shake on this. Well, guess as we're taping this, I received by email a withdrawal of the appearance by a former DA who was a Hochman supporter, who was just hired by Hochman as the director of victim services, and who just coincidentally, out of all the lawyers in America and in California, was selected by the one relative who doesn't support the resentencing out of scores of relatives, has now been appointed as head of victim services by Mr. Hochman. So DA politics at its best. The Menendez brothers, 2025, they've got the hearing scheduled in almost a month when this drops, give or take a day or two. I think that clearly, given the Netflix series, the Fox Nation series or documentary, and the initiation and the judge, not only did the DA invoke to resentencing, but the judge himself invoked his own judge-initiated resentencing that clearly, to my mind, was the lead legal story of the year. And by the way, we didn't even talk about Luigi.
No, we didn't. But I think that's going to be the lead legal story of 2025, because although Karen Friedman-Agnifilo has been in court and has gotten some media coverage for it, I think that is so recent, the recency bias on that. I think that the more of the legal process is going to play out in 2025. So I can easily see that in the top, 5 or certainly 10 next year when you spring this on me again with no warning. But yeah, I think that given specifically, the fact that there's going to be some bias in that me and Mark are the ones making this list, and the rabid media coverage that the Menendez has received, not only, as you say, in fictional form with the Netflix series, but just the number of channels that simulcast all of the various press conferences that were done over the course of the past few months. I think that certainly in California and in specifically our world, that is easily the biggest one of the year. So that was, for anyone who picked up when I said it was a family affair earlier, that was certainly what I was alluding to. So I completely agree with you, and I'm glad that you had that one in the bag. So you only had to do 4. That's not really fair. Come on.
Free merch on its way to replace your Chargers shirt. Only if they lose.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. I'll be sure to mail it to myself.
Okay.
All right, Mark. Well, thank you all very much for listening. We'll be back in 2025. Not just amorphously in 2025. We'll be back next week, but thank you all for listening in 2024, and we hope you enjoyed this year-end wrap-up, and we look forward to seeing you next week. If you are not already, follow us on YouTube, youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast. Commenting there is the only way at present to get merch, the aforementioned merch. So give us a subscribe, youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast, and leave us a comment. Mark is a wild card when he picks them. Sometimes it's nice things, sometimes it's derogatory. You never know, but go over there and interact with us, and that's a good way to get some merch. Mark, thanks for making some time here on this final weekend of the year. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will see you all next week.
You got it. Thanks, Gary.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.